Yes, it is.
You're under the spotlight.
But you're right, there's so little single level housing pursued in this area.
I mean, get into the cost. There are only other options, apartments in town.
Yeah.
But some people like the country.
And I saw it on TV too, it's on the news.
David
National,
Braverman has actually bought a piece.
Cable news.
I saw it on Lycoming County.
Yeah.
And that would be a little
Yeah.
Homepage.
Yeah, right.
You check that on a regular basis.
But yeah, there's more than that. That's one of the things about those places down for is it's a city level. Townhome is nice if you're younger and have kids and stuff, but Ron and I were there, like, that was just, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Your kids are
Oh, yeah, yeah. Colin has a shot at coming back to teach in college.
all awesome.
And he joked about buying the house down here, and I was like, all right.
Yeah, just touch.
The guy who bought Schellenberg,
Just trying to
across the street,
plan
lives somewhere in New York State.
ahead. I think so.
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
It's great.
Gravel,
It's gonna be a rough one.
yeah.
oh, just two of them,
Try to get the guy.
future politician.
Yeah, holding responsible.
Yeah, I'm hoping somebody gets to fix that.
And Chris,
Great spot for a second story house.
Yeah.
Well, we don't get time of the weekend.
How's your water?
Still is, you know, like we live in an iron mill.
Yeah.
So you have to
That's
replace
not
shower heads. Aerator.
Well, I've gotten really good at filtration. I'm an expert now. In fact, when I went to Nolan one day, I had a pump there, and I was telling the guys about the iron content. I said, I swear to God, we had a mine somewhere around here. He said, no, there's all through the village. He's like, they can point out the houses because they're local and they know exactly who's got sulfur in iron content. And next door to me, he's got sulfur issues. He doesn't make the iron.
is that what it is? Good.
It's just gonna say colloidal salt. Very good.
Right.
And Joe wrecked his motorcycle. He drove it. I never saw anybody feel up as fast.
Oh, yeah?
They never noticed.
Right. Yeah, when your water showers can. You know. Yeah, there's some benefit. We don't have the sulfur, and we don't have any of the.
I don't like iron.
Yeah, iron. I dump a bottle of bleach into the well, in the spring and in the fall. Yeah, but I don't know what my father.
Well, they were hard.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't pick it up from the
They didn't wash clothes. It's an extra one.
No, that's true.
Can you get me one? I'm sorry, I should pick one up.
Yeah. But yeah, having proper water.
Yeah. That's number one on the list.
Yeah. What does that entail? Obviously, it's gonna be millions. It's
Appeal
just-
for the in-person conferences.
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
And I also have
Yeah. Yeah, that would be nice. That would definitely. Yeah, right. I do know that.
Notice today.
My friend got last. Because they pay for it. If I tell them where I live, how close I am to water, they go, I think your house is like $1 million, $2.
Good morning, everyone. Before we convene the meeting this morning, I just want to make a couple statements so that this meeting goes smoothly. Okay. We ask that everyone who's here today is respectful and considerate of everybody. This has got very heated and not necessarily should be that way. If you are here to get in anyone's face or intimidate someone, you're in the wrong room. You might as well leave right now. If you're here to grandstand, then please wait for another venue to do your audition. We ask when you come up that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and that you are respectful of everyone in the room. Please direct your comments at the Board of Elections, not at the audience. We do not want you engaging the audience back and forth. So with that said, I will begin the meeting. He's going to start here. Okay. First,
You have an announcement there about an executive session.
I do not have that in front of me.
No, it's on the, oh, you have the
I don't have the
agenda?
agenda in front of me.
No, it's under your, it's under your.
Oh, okay. So at this time, we'll convene the Board of Elections and,
One second.
thank you. And on January the 5th, 2023 at 2 o'clock, we had an executive session to receive information about a policy matter. Okay. Ask for approval of the minutes of the December 27th, 22 meeting.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, so carried. We'll have public comment on agenda items only at this time. Morning.
My name is Karen DeSalvo. I'm from Cogan Station, Pennsylvania. I know that the commissioners have taken a lot of heat with regard to your decision to conduct the hand recount, and on that I would like to say 2 things. It is never wrong to do what is right. It is your job, your duty, to serve this community. You were elected by the people to be the voice of the people. Thank you for conducting the hand recount, for listening to the constituents that elected you. This is how the process is supposed to work. Our First Amendment to the Constitution gives us the ability to petition our government. We petition our government, we show up at hearings and express our concerns, and our elected officials respond to those concerns. You are constitutional warriors, and I thank you for that. But why were there concerns? I've been contacted by a number of different news outlets in the course of the last few weeks, and what constantly amazes me is the ability of many news outlets to ignore actual facts. They would rather call us names than actually deal with the evidence presented. So why are people concerned about the integrity of our elections across the United States? In November of 2020, the counting stopped on election night in many places across this country, including in many places in Pennsylvania, something we had never seen before. Despite efforts to gaslight us, we know that the counting stopped. Republican poll watchers in Pennsylvania reported their stories in the Giuliani hearings that followed the election. Poll watchers like attorney Justin Queter and former commanding naval officer Gregory Stenstrom reported chain of custody issues, sealed off counting areas with no Republican oversight. Republicans denied meaningful access to view the counting of the votes. We watched Gary Feldman, a poll watcher in Philadelphia, prevented from entering a polling place after presenting his ID and paperwork. We saw pizza boxes put up to cover the windows in Detroit, Michigan's counting areas. We saw cases rolled out from under skirted tables in Georgia after a fake water main break story was reported and Republican poll watchers exited the building. Jesse Morgan, a truck driver, did a press conference with the Amistad Project where he told us that he transported election ballots from Bethpage, New York to Lancaster, Pennsylvania in October of 2020, and his load of ballots mysteriously disappeared in the night. According to the Associated Press, an unknown number of computer thumb drives used to program voting machines were stolen from a city warehouse in Philadelphia just weeks before the November 2020 election. We know from former U.S. Attorney Bill McSwain that Attorney General Bill Barr told him to stand down and not investigate the election fraud in Pennsylvania. We saw 2,000 mules. With regard to the machines, we know that an arm of the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, issued a report on June 3rd, 2022 that said some voting machines across the United States were vulnerable and capable of being hacked and that vote tallies could be changed. We know that the EAC, a federal agency, issued a report in April of 2022 regarding tabulators flipping votes in Williamson County, Tennessee. We know that there are documented reports of the machines flipping the vote tallies in multiple states and that hand counts exposed these issues. With the exception of a few outlets, the mainstream press will not report this information. They just want to call us names, election deniers. They want to point to lawsuits that were dismissed by courts before evidence was even shared, dismissed for claims of standing and jurisdiction. What is interesting to me is that in 2016, many of these name callers also openly questioned the election results. Many prominent Democrats openly expressed their concerns about the vulnerability of the electronic voting equipment, Amy Klobuchar and Kamala Harris, to name a few. As for the results reached in this hand recount, I wish the process had been done with more transparency. When you established the procedures for this hand count, you indicated that observers from both parties could be present to monitor the proceedings. Don Peters, the local Republican chair, took on the task of lining up the volunteers and providing guidance to those monitoring. Don, a retired state trooper, took this task very seriously, put spreadsheets together so that we could track the numbers against the numbers reported in 2020 as they were counted. When it became apparent on the first day that this was not feasible, he came to you. He requested copies of the tally sheets at the end of each day of counting so that we could verify the numbers. He was told that this would be too difficult for us.
Salvo, you've used up your time, please.
Chairman Metzger, I'd like to relinquish my time to Karen.
He then said we need to get copies of those before they go back for final processing by Forrest. This was denied. We were told you can file a right to know request. We filed a right to know request the minute that we heard that the counting had ended on the 11th of January. We're still waiting for those tally sheets, unable to see them before this big press release today. What kind of an institution orders an audit? Let's use a bank, since we've used a bank analogy before in this room. If a bank orders an audit, they do not have the bank manager do an audit at his own bank. That is not transparency. This was just one piece of the puzzle. As you know, before we have come to the board asking for 10 things. You have given us 3, and we have obtained a few others through other means. You gave us a resolution to preserve the voting materials and an agreement that the election results would be posted at the precincts on election night, something that was always done before November of 2020, and a hand count of the ballots for the November 2020 election. The grassroots won their appeal to obtain the mail-in ballot images and envelopes. Those are currently under review. The grassroots also recently won in their lawsuit to obtain the CVRs, or the spreadsheets, from the machines. Of course, the Department of State just filed their appeal. According to the Department of State, we're not allowed to have the ballot images, even though the Office of Open Records disagreed. According to the Department of State, we are not allowed to have the CVRs, even though the Lycoming County Court of Common Pleas disagreed. According to the Department of State, we're not even allowed to vote on the issue of whether to use electronic voting equipment in this county. Lack of transparency is a familiar refrain. So what did we learn from this process? Hand counts can be done quickly and efficiently. It did not cost the taxpayers $55,000. It did not take 3 weeks to complete. It took 2.5 days of county employees shifted from their ordinary duties to perform this count. If a process was put into place whereby we could hand count after each election, we could trust but verify. At least we could be sure that the vote flipping that we have seen in Williamson County, Tennessee, DeKalb County, Georgia, Windham, New Hampshire, Mesa County, Colorado, Antrim County, Michigan, Cherokee County, Wyoming, South Dakota, Massachusetts, was not happening here.
like to relinquish my time, Commissioners.
I just want to end with this reminder. As a faction of our government attempts to move us away from local control, away from small voting precincts, away from accountability and transparency, state governments were never intended by our founding fathers to be mere conduits or implementation centers for federal regulation, law, and policy as they have become today. Local governments were never intended to be mere conduits subject to the whims of the state. The Pennsylvania Election Code, enacted in 1937, Title 25, Section 2642, gives you the oversight over our elections. It gives you the power. The framers of our U.S. Constitution were conscious of and wary of centralized control, centralized power. Their solution was to devise multiple systems of government. This creation has saved us from some assaults on our freedom. Thank you for illustrating to us that local government in Lycoming County still works. We can still petition our government and come before you in this way. So thank you for responding to the voices of the people that elected you to be their voice.
Thank you.
Jeff Stroman, Woodward Township. I just once again wanted to say thank you, and mission accomplished on this aspect of transparency and community effort. The job is done, and I believe that on the front of the ballots being looked at and the transparency of the process, the voters of Lycoming County are able to make an informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Tom Adams, Williamsport. I think the underlying problem with this isn't just the voter rolls in the Department of State. People that are out of control, not going by rule of law, but going by their own whims or what they don't like in the law. Right now, we still have Judicial Watch still in lawsuit and putting pressure on the Department of State to get these voter rolls cleaned up in the counties. And there's at least 27 counties in Pennsylvania that are not doing it. So this is the problem. We have a bureaucratic state, and it's not the representation of the people. And this is what has to change. And when people petition your local government, that's the proper way to do things. And we want local action, and not to have the state and people who think they know better, are smart, or present themselves as being smarter than the room, and are just supposed to be just normal Americans, are supposed to care about the country, but obviously they don't. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
As everybody before me, I'd like to say thank you also for everything you guys do as an organization, as representatives of who we are in this community. This is a tough road to hoe, so again, sincerely appreciate that. My name is John Shableski. I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force. I've lived here in Lycoming County for almost 30 years and raised my family here. I believe strongly in our Constitution, the rights that we have earned. And by virtue of all of that, I consider myself a patriot. And I understand where everyone is coming from. I understand the passion that you bring to this. And I'm not going to debate you about that, because it is your constitutional right to have those feelings. But there is a point when ideals and anger come together and create harm. We are now at that point. The last time I spoke, I referenced the lead up to World War II and what made Hitler possible. We're seeing echoes of that right now. These things where we establish mistrust as a matter of who we are in our community as well as in this country are leading to harmful actions. I'm going to go back to my script. With his words and anger, Hitler tapped into the side of the German population that no one thought possible. The anger and hatred that was unleashed and directed at people who became the scapegoat for all of Germany's perceived problems. It's not just about ethnicity or faith. It's about somebody to blame this on. Propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident they're acting on their own free will. That's Joseph Goebbels. That's where we are. And your words bring risk and harm to those of us around. The people sitting at this podium, or on that stage, those gentlemen sitting over there, those of us who speak out for our own feelings are now at risk. We have going back to Steve Scalise being shot on a baseball field. He's a congressman.
Now, just recently, we had a guy in New Mexico who was not happy with the way the election went out, hired people to shoot up commissioners' homes and supervisors' homes. That's the risk we're at. So, yes, speak freely, speak your voice, but choose your words carefully, because the moment you inflame with rhetoric and anger, people become targets. Literally, right now, we become targets. So please, use your words wisely. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good morning, Bill Fenderson from Woodward Township. You know, it's great to hear all these stories, and so far what I've heard is other states, people not addressing the commissioners, addressing the audience, which you kindly said before the meeting, that we would address the commissioners. Unfortunately, we don't do that. We set our own game plan as we come into this, and for everyone who thinks that we're fighting amongst ourselves, the problem is, I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is, one side don't agree with the other side, and that's always been that way. Is that not correct? It's not going to go away. Unfortunately, if we don't do certain things to make it better, we're going to be in trouble. And this county has a lot more on its table than this mess we have right now. And I don't think it's a mess. Every time I look at the news, every day I get notifications from all over different networks. Even on YouTube. It's crazy. It's crazy. We have more publication now than what we do when the Little League comes. And it makes it bad for this county. So, you know, let's not get any more black eyes. Everyone done their work. Everyone done their homework. And it's amazing to me that it's a contingency to keep on going. But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your services. I know there's a lot of stuff going on, and we need some other stuff to be taking place right now other than this. We got a corners place that has to be taken to retrofitted. We got a mall problem. I hate to go into this, but we have other things on our table that we're spending money for that needs to be addressed properly. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Al Sievers, Lowestoft Township. The gentleman there brought up about the divisiveness of local politics, whatever. I just want to give you an example. About 15 years ago, I was personally sued in federal court up here for being a member of a giant Masonic conspiracy to overthrow the local governments. Myself and the state police, I mean, they threw it out, but there's people here believe that. Many times when I worked for the state, I was issued applications to join the Pennsylvania militia. We want the Aryan nation in this area. When I worked with the gas companies, Talisman and Fortuna, which are the same company, had a painted post. They're in painted post because they chose not to come to Lycoming County because of the things they heard about the rednecks. It's not safe for Canadian citizens. Everybody with those two companies were Canadians. They're Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. They were told, you have to be afraid to come down here. You don't want your kids in a school down here because of local animosity. And I don't know what the solution is. I don't. But I go to local bars and I hear this stuff, and it's amazing what you hear. It really is. I agree there's problems.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Is this, nope, 5 minutes. All right.
Go ahead.
It's worth a reference. Let's see.
Can you state name first?
Yes. My name's Wayne Roush. I live at 508 Pine Street in Williamsport. Let me put my thoughts in order. I believe that everything that is happening here is within appropriate realms, like collecting affidavits, canvassing, going door to door, raising concerns, all that stuff's great. I'm a little concerned that there hasn't been more pushback on some of the claims that have been made, and I don't personally know what the truth is, but I think it's appropriate to have some counter to some of the claims that have been made that don't seem to align with my understanding of the facts, and that could be clarified if it is of interest to anyone concerned. And again, I don't know if I'm correct, I don't know if they're correct, it's just something that I think is appropriate to bring up. Some facts that were brought up was that the counting stopped on election night. That is largely due to the fact that over the entire country, the amount of mail-in ballots exploded. Due to COVID and due to other factors, there was a lot of mail-in ballots, and that has been a point of contention, but it's also a fact that it takes a long time to process all of those ballots, especially in counties with millions of residents. In Pennsylvania in particular, nobody is allowed to begin canvassing or counting those ballots until election morning at 7 o'clock. So in order to count those ballots, the time simply was not possible to do it in a day or reasonably into the night. In those precincts, they did cancel and move to the next day, right away in the morning. They only had a break of a few hours in most of them, I believe. So I believe that's relevant to bring up. There was, and I recall, I believe this was in Georgia, about the water main break and the poll watchers being escorted out of the building and that kind of thing before counting resumed. It's my understanding that there was no water main break. There was not a claim of a water main break. They broke for the night like other counties had around 10 o'clock, I believe, and started to send people home. At that time, they were called by somebody else in the hierarchy that said, no, we do want you to count all night. So they went back to work and continued to count. I do not know what steps may have been taken to try and bring the poll watchers back, but that's my understanding of the facts of what occurred. Jesse Morgan, the situation of the postal trailer that went missing with ballots. In that situation, he was interviewed. He said that he did not make a close examination of the contents of the trailer. He believed that there were ballots present. He believed he saw ballots. He does not know how many. He does not know how many there may have been if they were ballots. His personal estimate when interviewed was between 250 and 7,500, but he clarified that he just does not know. It is worth noting that his trailer did not go missing, nor did its contents. There was an inspection or an investigation by the United States Postal Service, the Office of the Inspector General, the United States Postal Inspection Service, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So that's 4 different eyes all on this one investigation, sharing information. They tracked the trailer, they tracked the contents of the trailer, they interviewed everyone involved, and they viewed the security footage of every step that was involved. They found no evidence of ballots, the trailer was accounted for, the contents of the trailer was accounted for. When he dropped his trailer off, it was unloaded because half the load had to go back to Harrisburg, and the other half of the load was distributed in Lancaster County.
Ray, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Certainly.
The public comment is on the agenda items only, and I think what we're starting to get away from what the purpose of this meeting is today, is to go over what happened in Lycoming County. And I do have 2 questions for Forrest that pertain to a comment you made. Okay, Forrest, when we did the recount that day, when we did the count that day, the mail-in ballots, were they done that morning? I understand.
The pre-canvassing started at 7 o'clock a.m. We completed most of the mail ballots in the late afternoon. There were some miscellaneous mail ballots that came in the mail on election day or were hand-delivered on election day that would have been done later in the evening. And following that, the only mail ballots that would be left to be canvassed after election day would have been the military and overseas ballots that can arrive up to 7 days following the election.
Okay, in Lycoming County, was there any pause overnight, or were all the ballots counted?
There was no pause necessary because the work was completed that day.
Election day?
That's correct.
Okay.
I do have some comments
Yes.
about Lycoming County,
Yes.
however, my time is expired.
Go ahead, I want to hear them,
Okay.
because I interrupted you.
No problem. Okay. One of the comments is that I was not here for the election meeting that discussed the results of the canvassing that was done for the county. It's my understanding that Forrest responded to each of those situations and explained how they matched up with our data, our records, our information. Some of those data did allow us to correct some records, is my understanding, but in general, most were explained. On January 10th, there was let me see here, an interview on the Gateway Pundit by both Jeff Stroman and Karen DeSilva. Many of the claims, including the 44% error rate of their canvass, was repeated. They did say that some of those issues were addressed. However, they did reiterate that 44% rate. So I'm not sure what disagreement still stands in terms of the canvassing that was done. One other thing that concerned me deeply was a statement that I will quote by Jeff Stroman. And again, I don't mean this to be antagonistic or anything like that. It's just when statements like this are made, I think it is worth bringing them up for discussion so that we are all on the same page in this room and outside of this room. There were numerous statements that I would like to read, but I'll just go with this one for now because of time. Jeff Stroman stated, "The other thing I want to make you aware of, and also the Patriots of Pennsylvania, is investigate your Director of Voter Services. We believe up here in Lycoming County that that's part of the game, part of the steal. Our Director of Voter Services is playing for the other team. He's as liberal as the day is long. So we keep hitting these brick walls. He's enforcing the directive of the state, the Department of State, and we're trying to protect our commissioners. Your county commissioners are the people who are in charge of your vote, not the Department of State. We need to put pressure on our county commissioners across the Commonwealth to stand up to the Department of State because they're a bunch of bullies, Brian." And this goes on, but my point in bringing it up is that it's something to accuse our own election director of fraud. And I would like to bring that up, and there are more comments made during that interview that I believe are relevant, but would stretch on for a fair amount of time. So we can call it at that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Certainly.
I want to just, you asked, at the very beginning, you asked, basically asked whether there was anything here in the county. You referred to the national incidents. This Board of Elections has not found anything that was fraudulent or improper in this county. The issues that were brought to the Board of Elections in this book were investigated by the department and presented at a public meeting and explained why there were differences. For example, a post office box that someone used at UPS. So to this day, just to be unequivocally clear, we have found no evidence of any of the incidents that were described by various citizens in this county. Now, whether they happen in another county, I don't pass judgment on. I don't think my colleagues do either. The other thing is we found no fraudulent activity by Mr. Lehman, and I think it's fair to say that we have full confidence in his integrity and in his ability to run the Department of Elections in compliance with the law and in compliance with what his responsibilities are. So, because you seem to express some concern about whether you had heard anything, whether they were here.
Certainly.
Okay.
The only other thing I would add very quickly is I am a seasonal employee of the county. Anybody in this room, anybody anywhere in the county, no matter what you believe, no matter what the situation is, if you ever run into me, I'll help you to the fullest of my ability, every single time. I don't care what you think. I've had people talk to me on the phone about all kinds of things that they think. I help them to the greatest ability that I can, and I'm proud of that. So please do not take anything that I've said today as any kind of animosity. Any single person in this room who would be lined up to work with me on any topic, I would be no reservation in doing so.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Good morning.
My name is Sharon Yock, Simon, Hogan Station. I represent the portion of the voters that are very much behind Mr. Lycoming. We have complete confidence in him. And I'll be brief because
Sharon?
the truth isn't complicated.
Sharon, can you pull the mic down just in front of you?
Oh, sure.
I don't want you stretching your neck up to it. There you go. Thank you.
Test, test. Okay. I'll be brief because the truth isn't complicated. Everything, everywhere, all at once. That describes the election deniers' modus operandi. Create doubt, disruption, chaos, harass election officials, and poll workers so that they quit. At what point do we say enough? I know I've had enough. I know a lot of people I talk to have had enough. And I'll just say this. One of the local election deniers is quoted on All Things Considered. Lawmakers who discount Trump supporters do so at their own peril. So you can take those comments any way you want to. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. We have number 5, which be approved polling place change for Losac Township Precinct 7. Yes, please. Of course, before we start, I want to congratulate you on your birth of your second child.
Thank you. I guess it's good. I can get it out of the way now so I can answer the same question that I would be asked. She was just over 8 pounds, baby girl, Vienna Wren-Lehman. She's very small, and there's 2 full-grown adults to take care of her, but she has us outnumbered and surrounded anyway. So
And how's Big Brother doing?
Welcome to Paris.
he loves her. Yeah, he's very.
For now, he does.
Yeah, we were happy that he took to her as quickly as he did.
That's
So
good.
some sleepless nights, but we're getting there.
Okay, thank you.
This item number 5, this is to change the polling place for Loyalsock Township, 7th Precinct. This is necessitated by the construction issues out at Greenview Alliance Church. They had an emergency situation just before the November election where they discovered some issues with their roof. They're still in the process of addressing that. It's anticipated they'll be out of commission for this year. It's going to be a long process to redo that entire roof. Obviously, we're very aware of kind of the supply construction shortages that are out there in the economy. So what we're looking to do is change that polling place to St. Anne Roman Catholic Church, which we had used in the past as a polling place in Loyalsock. So this would be a temporary change, hopefully just for 2023 elections, but we'll just have to see how things go out there. The judge of elections for that precinct knows the folks out at St. Anne's and was able to arrange that. So that's what would be on the table, is to change to St. Anne's 1305 Northway Road for Loyalsock 7.
Okay, motion.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So carried.
Thank you.
Okay, number 6, receive information from the voter services about the completed hand count of the votes casted in presidential electors and auditor general contest in November 2020 general election.
Right, so this will take partially the form of a PowerPoint, and I'll be talking about it as we go through. And for the benefit of the public who may or may not have been involved in the process running up to the hand count, there is information in here that deals with the process we followed and everything else. So it's not just talking about the outcome, but also going back and explaining how we got there, what was the process that we followed. So if you could go to the
First, I have
first
a
one.
quick question before we start. The observers that were allowed to be in the room that day,
Yes.
were they allowed to walk around? What was the guidelines on the observers?
Well, the rules that were approved by the Board of Elections said they were permitted to be up to 6 feet away from the activity that was occurring. We had some tables set up where party observers could be positioned during the day if they just wanted a place to sit and observe, but they also had the ability to circulate if they wished. And then in addition to that, if they had any questions that they needed to have answered, they could have approached me, the on-site supervisor, if I wasn't there, which would have been Director of Administration, I think.
Was there any observers that brought anything to your attention where they were restricted, they weren't allowed to do so? Did anybody make any complaints or concerns?
Not as far as their ability to be in the space and observe the proceedings, no.
Okay, thank you.
So this was the scope of the work that we completed during the hand recount. It was just short of 60,000 ballots that were cast in November 2020. You can see the breakdown there in terms of votes that were cast on Election Day, which is in person, votes that were cast by mail, which includes absentee and mail-in ballots, including mail ballots cast by military and overseas voters, and then finally provisional ballots that would have been canvassed after Election Day. They would have been cast at a polling place, then looked at after Election Day. They're organized into 183 batches, 81 Election Day batches, which was one for each precinct, 94 mail batches, 8 provisional batches. Next. A couple key terms just to explain these for folks that don't do this every day. Counter group is a phrase we use to identify ballots cast in different contexts, so their totals can be reported separately. So I kind of ran through them already: Election Day, mail, provisional. When we're scanning in ballots, we can tell our voting system these are Election Day ballots, these are mail ballots, these are provisionals. That lets us actually run separate reports, where if someone wanted to see what happened just with provisional ballots or just with mail ballots or just with Election Day ballots, you have the ability to do that. Next. And when we talk about a batch, that's the smallest grouping we have available of ballots for which we can run a results report. A batch is scanned together. It's basically, just imagine a pile of ballots. We tell the system we're going to scan in this pile of ballots. We do that, and then we tell the system we're done. And it draws a line under that, and they are retained as a grouping within the voting system. A couple examples of what that could be: you could have all the Election Day ballots cast at a single precinct on Election Day. That's a batch. You could have the mail ballots from a single precinct that were pre-canvassed and scanned together on Election Day. That's another batch. Or you could have provisional ballots that may have been cast across multiple precincts. They don't all have to be from the same place. And they would have been canvassed and counted together after the election. That could be a batch as well. Next. So our goals for the hand count were to hand count just 2 of the contests on all the ballots cast in November 2020. The board selected the president contest, also called presidential electors, on the ballot, and also auditor general. Now, we had 5 total contests on the ballot, and so we chose just the 2 of them. Goal number 2 was to demonstrate that the electronic voting system counts ballots accurately, and that the outcome of the November 2020 election in the county was correct. Next. So it was not necessary for the hand count results to match the voting system results 100% in order to demonstrate the accuracy of the voting system and the correctness of the outcome. Now, we had attacks on the county's elections and on its voting system that alleged that our vote totals from that election were off by thousands. There is no universe in which that allegation was true or where it was going to be true. The voting system is supported by 4 years of accumulated evidence, from pre-election testing, post-election audits, 2 statewide recounts, and now the completed hand count to show that the results are accurate. Next. Project cost, I threw a little bit in here. I think that the Director of Administration in the Commissioner's office would be able to answer more granular questions about the cost to the county in terms of dollars and cents. But I can.
Of course, I will address that.
Understood, yeah. So I will just state that it proceeded over the course of 3 days from January 9th to 11th. We had 31 county employees total, 3 of us in a supervisory role, 28 who were canvassing teams, and my best estimate was 559 combined staff hours. I do want to thank them for the work they put in. Was a challenging lift to get people out of all those different departments away from their regular work at a time they were not expecting, and to ask them to do what they were doing. I'm thankful to them, as I'm always thankful to the employees from other departments who come and help us with every election when that time comes. One of the important things we had to manage during this hand count was ballot organization and chain of custody. These are federal election records. We have a duty of care to those records. We still had our ballots organized in the original batches in which they were counted from the election, and it was important to maintain that organizational and physical integrity as those ballots were being counted again, because as long as they exist, as long as we have them, we have to maintain them. And so when canvassing teams were conducting the recount, they had to sign out a batch of ballots. They had to sign, they had to record the date and the time they signed it out. We had a list of every batch of ballots from the election, that 183 that I mentioned. And so as they wanted to work with one, they signed it out. Next. And after they were done recounting the ballots in their batch, then they had to sign it back in on the next side. And that's how we were able to keep track not only of which ones were out there being worked on, but also knowing that we had all of them back in custody and that they had all been done within the context of the project. Next. The canvassing teams consisted of 2 people. Each batch was prepared before they began any counting activity. They oriented all the ballots to face the same direction. Because both contests that were being counted were on the front of the ballot. We wanted to minimize distractions, so we asked everybody, make sure you get all these ballots organized facing the same way beforehand so that you are not distracted midway through. One canvasser read the votes on the ballots, the other canvasser recorded each vote on the tally sheet as it was announced. Now, if they could not agree on how to count a ballot, the on-site supervisor was asked to assist, or to break a tie if needed. That did not happen terribly often, but it did happen. I think I was asked to look at a ballot maybe 10, 12 times during those days. Some other on-site supervisors were. And of course, they had some teams were discussing more ballots probably themselves without having to bring them to our attention. Canvassing teams were not told the vote totals for their batches. They canvassed their batch of ballots not knowing what the correct numbers were supposed to be. In other words, they didn't know what the voting system had counted those ballots to be in the official results. They were doing it on their own, and when they brought them up, then we did a quick comparison. Next. This is an example of what one of the ballots looked like. The fronts of all the ballots in all the precincts would have looked the same. The backs could have been a little different based on legislative districts, but the presidential electors were over there in the left-hand column on the front of the ballot. The Auditor General contest was in the right-hand column. Next. As they were looking through the ballots, counting the ballots, they had to record what they were counting onto what we called a tally sheet. These tally sheets could go up to 50 marks before they maxed out. The canvassers needed to record a mark for every ballot. There was no ballot in which that they didn't record anything. They were either recording a tally mark for one of the candidates. So for president, they had Biden, Trump, and Jorgensen, who was a libertarian. They also had the write-in option if the voter had filled in the write-in oval. And then they had options to record a mark if there was an overvote, which is where a voter fills in more than one oval, or if there was a no vote, where they didn't get a mark inside any oval. So they were going to put a tally mark on that sheet for every ballot that they looked at. Next. Here I shortened up a tally sheet to only go to 10 instead of 50, just to be able to explain those rows. I already kind of mentioned this, the candidate rows, write-in, overvote, no vote. And then at the bottom, they could add all those subtotals together and get the total number of cards that they looked at, which would work for the cards in that pile. Some batches, you wouldn't be able to do this on one tally sheet, because what they need to do is when they get to 50, they have to subtotal everything up, and then they move on to a new tally sheet and continue with the ballots. There are some batches where they could do all of this on one tally sheet. We have some batches from the election that might have only been 1 or 2 ballots that we got. Maybe a military ballot came in the last day. But we have other batches. I think the largest one we looked at in the hand count was 1,400 ballots. So they may have needed 30 of these sheets or 40 of these sheets in order to get through that many ballots. Next. So as soon as they got to 50, as I mentioned, they add everything up, and then they resume work on a new tally sheet. Next. When they had all the tally sheets done for a batch, they had to add them all together. They have all these subtotals. They had to be carried on to what's called a batch total sheet. So if they had 10 tally sheets for a batch, they could carry those totals into columns 1 through 10 on a total sheet, and then add all of those together too. And if it sounds complicated, it's because it is. You know, you're taking a digital process that we use with an electronic voting system, and you're turning it analog when you do a hand count. So that is going to involve a lot of carrying over of numbers from one paper to another paper to another paper. Next. So those subtotals get carried over to the batch total sheet. They're carried into columns 1, 2, and so on. It can accommodate subtotals for up to 10 tally sheets. Some of our largest precincts needed more of these batch total sheets, and then we had to carry those over. Next. Here's an example of what that looked like. They would take the subtotal from a tally sheet, move those over onto a totals sheet. Next. And then each completed batch total sheet would reflect all of the candidate totals and card counts for all of the underlying tally sheets that they had added together. Next. The standards they used when they counted the ballots came from federal and state law. The 2002 HAVA Act required a uniform and non-discriminatory standard to define what constitutes a vote. Every state had to develop a standard. Pennsylvania did that and adopted a standard back in 2003. And those are the standards that we have always used and that we used in the hand count. Next. And this is just a summary of what was gone over in much more detail with the canvassing teams. But what it comes down to is that marks that fall inside a target area, and what we mean by that is the oval next to a candidate or a choice, those are the only relevant factor to determining voter intent, or if a vote is valid or invalid. Any marks that fall outside those target areas for the contest are not relevant to determining voter intent, or if the vote is valid or invalid. So basically, if they hit an oval, it counts for something. If they're outside an oval, it doesn't mean anything. If the voter marked inside just one target area, it's a valid vote that got counted. If a voter marked inside multiple target areas, whether deliberately or accidentally, it's an overvote. And if the voter did not mark inside any target area, that's no vote, regardless of anything else they might have done on the ballot. They could have circled candidates' names, they could have written in the margins. It does not matter according to the standards that the state adopted. So those were the standards that were employed when we did the hand count. Next. And these were the numbers that we released shortly after the recount was completed in our press release. The November 2020 official results in one column, the 2023 hand count results there, the overall vote changes for the candidates. I added in a percent change column. Obviously, Nina Ahmad, the big winner there, gaining 11 votes, which was a 0.7 increase for her. I had not let her know the good news, but I'm sure somebody could. The presidential candidates, their vote totals changed by, looks like, 0.9 and 0.2 so not very large. Next slide. But why did the vote totals change? Well, vote total changes during recounts, these are always minimal shifts. They don't have anything to do with the accuracy of the voting system. They do happen, and we know they happen because we've had some experience in this area in the last few years. We did recounts for the Commonwealth Court contest in November of 21. We did a statewide recount for the Republican Senate contest in May of 22. And so we were kind of expecting there would be some changes. The hand count adds some uniqueness to that, but we'll get into that. Next slide. There are three main factors that drive vote total changes during recounts. One is interpretation of what we call marginal marks, and I'll get into all this in more detail. A second one is ballot inventory errors, and a third is human error, and that's particularly problematic in the context of a hand count. Next. So interpretation of marginal marks. When we talk about that, we're talking about voters who do something different than what the instructions on the ballot tell them to do, which is if you want to cast a vote, fill in the oval completely, and that's all you should do. Don't go filling in anything else. Don't fill the oval in halfway. Don't do an X. Don't do a check mark. When voters kind of go off the reservation a little bit and don't do the fill in the oval completely, that's what we call a marginal mark. If a voter does a check mark, a tick mark, an X, we have to deal with that. When we review marginal marks, it can sometimes be a very close call as to which oval, or in some cases more than one oval, is actually pierced, and how those marks then should be interpreted. Now, marginal marks were identified, they were reviewed, and they were manually resolved during the official canvass after the November 2020 election. It's done after every election. But the hand count might nevertheless have interpreted some of those marks differently. So you had one person, one human being, hand reviewing marginal marks after November 2020. You have a different person looking at a ballot during a hand count. If it is really close, reasonable people might disagree. And if you put another person in front of it, they might see it a different way. And if you put 5 lawyers in a circle around it, they might see it differently. No offense. Next slide. This is an example of a marginal mark. You know, and it's actually too easy with these because these are perfect digital representations. Voters' marks are not that clean. You know, they trail off, they fade away. Here you can have kind of a pixel perfect. If you got in on a microscope, you could see where it ends or where it doesn't end. But the idea attempting to be illustrated here is that they can make a mark that goes right along the edge of in an oval, but did it go in or not? Is it a vote for Washington or is it no vote at all? Those are the kinds of calls that the canvassers have to look at, that election officials have to look at all the time, and then decide, did it get into the oval or not? Does it count as a vote or not? Next. Here's another one. Now, obviously, they voted for Lincoln there, but did the top part of that X also get into the oval for Washington? If it did, it's an overvote. If it didn't, it's just a vote for Lincoln. But when you've got a real ballot and a real voter mark, that can be a really tough decision, and it can lead to vote totals changing. Next. Here's another one. They tried to do a check mark. It went right in between 2 ovals. Did it get into one? Did it get into the other? Did it get into both? Or did it not get into anything at all? Those are the kinds of marks you can be faced with and that the canvassers were faced with.
These are real examples.
No, these are just
ones you made.
These
up
are
for
digital mock-up.
teaching. Right.
Yeah, and they're representative of actual marks I've seen on ballots. And yeah, and for better or worse, I have to look at thousands of these. You know.
I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
In a typical election like the 2020, how many marginal marks do you review after the election?
I recall after November 2020, I manually reviewed a few hundred ballots. Now, it wasn't all for president. It's a question of, they could have, what you see with marginal marks is somebody is going down the ballot and they might have hit the oval successfully in a bunch of contests, but because they're just doing tick marks, there might have been one where it's close. And the one right after that, they might have gone completely outside. So you're seeing, maybe one contest on one ballot. So it's not like it's a couple hundred votes for president. It might have been this many for president, this many for this many for that. But I recall looking at a few hundred ballots overall. And we go looking for those because they're valid votes, they're legal votes. We want them to be counted. And so we go ahead and do that. So these marks that canvassers were seeing during the hand count, they're not brand new. They were marks that were seen and adjudicated before. So they're not missing votes. They're votes that they might look at differently than the way they were looked at before.
And just so that the public knows, you're looking at it on a computer screen, right?
That's right.
So you're not handling the ballots. They've
No.
been scanned and you're going through a computer.
That's right, yes. Next. So, as I mentioned, these marginal marks, we identify, review, manually resolve them during the official canvass, during the 2 to 3 weeks after every election. During that review, sometimes the original adjudication by the voting system, we determined that that was correct. The system got it right. In other cases, we might look at it and decide to override what the voting system did because somebody just barely got into the oval, the voting system didn't count it. We say, no, that's a vote, it needs to count. So we count it. But what's key to that point is that they're never ignored. They're always looked at by a person and a decision is made whether to let the voting system stand or to override. Next. During the hand count, the canvassing teams might have interpreted some marginal marks differently than how the voting system or the original human reviewer interpreted those marks after the election. Now, if the hand counters disagree with the voting system or the post-election human review of that marginal mark, it doesn't make the hand count right. It doesn't make the voting system wrong. And that's just because ambiguous marks, they are always looked at, they're always resolved by human judgment after the election. They're not left to the voting system. And differing interpretations of those marks can cause variations in vote totals, but those variations don't have any bearing on the accuracy of the voting system. Next. So human interpretation of marginal marks caused variations in vote totals within 85 out of the 183 ballot batches. Most of the variations involved the overvote and the no vote columns, in which votes were being awarded or removed based on whether the voter marked inside a target area or maybe inside too many target areas. And the human interpretation of marginal marks caused variations in vote totals for Biden or Trump specifically in that contest in 43 out of the 183 ballot batches. Next. Ballot inventory. So poll workers are responsible to reconcile their ballot inventories to ensure that all the ballots are accounted for after every election. So we review the general returns the poll workers bring back. We then perform additional ballot inventory reconciliation during the official canvass. Where a contest margin falls within 0.5% after the election and it necessitates a statewide recount, that is where any remaining ballot inventory errors would be identified and corrected as all those ballot batches are recounted. Ballot inventory errors that were identified and corrected during recent statewide recounts did cause vote totals to shift slightly, did not affect the outcome of those contests, but it is another source for variations in vote totals. Next. Now the margin of November 2020, it exceeded 0.5%. I think the margin between the candidates was 1.1 or 1.2%. It did not necessitate a statewide recount. Since a statewide recount was not previously conducted, the hand count identified and corrected some ballot inventory errors that affected the vote totals. However, the hand count did not add any value to that process. If the margin of any contest in November 2020 had been close enough to warrant a statewide recount. The process of preparing for and conducting a regular machine recount would have identified and corrected the same errors in exactly the same way. Changes in vote totals due to ballot inventory, they have no bearing on whether the voting system counts individual ballots accurately. Next. So these are the ballot inventory changes in the hand count. The first column there is ballot cards from November 2020. The second column is ballot cards in January of 23, and then the net change. These are all the batches out of 183 where there was a change. The ones that say ED after them are election day precinct batches. The ML is mail ballot batches. Those refer to precincts where we pre-canvassed a large batch of ballots just from that precinct together on election day. And then the last one, that miscellaneous 82 batch, was a batch of miscellaneous mail ballots based on the number. Those would have been ballots that came in the mail or were hand-delivered to voter services on election day, and they would have been a mix of different precincts that all got scanned that afternoon or that evening. Now, I want to note specifically, expand on the Hepburn Township mail ballot batch, because it is a 13 ballot change in inventory instead of just 1 or 2. And this error came about during the official canvass after the election, in which 13 ballots from mail ballots from Hepburn Township were scanned into the official results twice during an attempt to scan a larger batch that was 334 ballots from Hepburn Township. It was not a voting system issue. It was a human error. And it came to light just before the hand count during the process of assembling these reports and these materials. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if the margin of any contest on the November 2020 ballot had been close enough to warrant a statewide recount, the process of preparing for and conducting the regular machine recount would have identified and corrected that ballot inventory error at that time, just as the process of preparing for this recount led to it being identified and corrected now. So the fact that this recount was a hand count really didn't make any difference to that. Now, going forward, all 67 counties now participate in batch-based risk-limiting audits that assist with identifying and correcting ballot inventory errors before the official results are certified. That was actually not yet the case in 2020 because those audits were still being piloted. And in addition, all official canvasses, post-election audits, and recounts, they are now all conducted using batch-based results reporting, and that lets us identify and correct ballot inventory errors. That's why the statewide recounts we conducted in 2021 and in 2022, after the 2020 election, those caused ballot inventories to change by only 1 or 2 ballots.
Did the batch-based risk-limiting audit process get initiated after the hearings that were held in Harrisburg, after the 2020 election?
It started before that, but there were different methods of conducting risk-limiting audits that were being piloted. So counties did it one way, we tried it a different way, eventually settled on the batch-based method after 2020. The method we used in November 2020 was a polling method where you were actually pulling individual ballots out of batches to look at. And at the time, we were running reports based on precincts and counter groups, but not necessarily down at the batch level, which would have identified this even more quickly.
Did you make the recommendation to do the batch-based?
I was one of several county election directors that recommended the batch-based risk-limiting audits.
So fortunately, the 13 that were counted twice.
Yeah.
That was a human error, not a machine error.
That's right. Yeah. Next slide, please. So the last reason for changes in vote totals is human hand counting errors. And I should be very clear here. I don't mean anything that I'm going to say in this section to reflect on the county employees who did this work. It's nothing about any of them. It is part and parcel of the process of trying to hand count large quantities of ballots. It's simply prone to human error, no matter who the people are who are doing the work. You can try to control for it, but it will always be there. Humans can incorrectly count the number of cards in a batch. Recounting the number of cards by hand, it's time consuming and tedious. Some batches required multiple attempts just to confirm how many ballot cards were present, because we had the voting system totals, but the whole point of doing a hand count is to be a check on the voting system. It's interesting that when you do this, you're using the voting system as the guide, so you're sort of assuming that's correct. So if you get a different number, you go, well, that can't be good, but maybe it really is off. How many times do you have two human beings sit down and hand count a huge stack of ballots before you're satisfied that that number they're getting to really is correct and not the voting system total? I could take a batch of ballots and run them through our voting system 3-4 times in a row in 30 minutes, and if the number comes out the same every time, I'm going to be pretty satisfied that that number is accurate. Whereas if you ask two people to do that, they would be gone for an entire day if they had to count a stack of ballots this high 3 times. Humans can miss or duplicate votes during counting. Humans can incorrectly read or transcribe voter selections during counting. What I mean by that is they could write the wrong tally mark, they could write it in the wrong column. They can commit transcription or mathematical errors when they're adding or carrying over vote totals from tally sheets to the batch total sheets. There are so many potential points of failure along the way when you have human beings doing this process. And that was only hand counting 2 contests on the ballot out of, I think there were 5 or 6 contests on that ballot. If you increase that to say, well, let's hand count all of them, 5, 6 contests, it doesn't just make it 3 times as difficult going from 2 to 6 contests. It exponentially increases the difficulty and complexity and tediousness because now you have to make sure you're recording tally marks in the correct locations for all of those as you go. You're having to flip every ballot over to look at the front and the back. And now you really are having to get into methods where instead of trying to do the whole ballot at once, they may have to go through the entire stack and say, we're just going to count the votes for president this time. Then we'll start the stack all over again and do the votes for attorney general and then auditor general. So instead of going through that pile once, you're really going through it probably 6 times if you really, really want to get the correct numbers. So the 2 days, 2.5 days, you're probably looking at more like 2 weeks if you were doing it that way, making sure it was accurate. Next. Humans might not always uniformly interpret marginal marks on ballots. We talk about wanting a uniform, consistent standard. Well, if you have county election staff who are reviewing those, that's a lot fewer people. You're more likely to have a uniform standard for how you're adjudicating those marks that are kind of oddball. Did it go in the oval or not? When you have 14 canvassing teams, 28 people, you've got at least 14, maybe up to 28 different standards. And that's one of the reasons why the U.S. Supreme Court stopped the recounting in Florida after the 2000 election, because it said, look, you've got 70 people in a room, they've all got different standards, and you can't do a hand count with 70 different standards. And that's why HAVA came about and said you have to have one. Now, you can try to hammer that into 28 volunteers or 50 volunteers or whatever, but there's always going to be, unfortunately, some drift. Humans can become distracted, tired, frustrated. We saw 1 or 2 cases, even in a 2.5 day long process that we had, where a team of people had been with the same batch for so long that they were clearly burned out. They were getting card count numbers that were not correct, and we had to just take the batch from them and give it to somebody else because they could not bear to look at it anymore. Human errors can commingle with or even obscure other variations due to interpretations of marginal marks or ballot inventory. So you look at the results for a batch and they're different from what you had in the voting system. Which ones are human errors? Which ones are changes in ballot inventory? Which ones are just good faith differently in interpreting an odd mark on a ballot? How do you separate those out? It's impossible. And all of those issues occurred during the operation. I sprinkled in an anecdote or 2 there, but they all happened during those 2.5 days. Next. Hand counts are slow. they are uniquely prone to human error and subjective judgment compared to machine recounts. The machine recounts we did for Commonwealth Court for the Republican Senate contest, they're quicker, they're less resource intensive, and they're more accurate. The machine recounts identify and correct ballot inventory errors more quickly, more accurately, and more consistently. Machine recounts apply a single uniform standard to counting those ballots, and machine recounts circumvent most of the sources of human error that I enumerated. Next. The electronic voting system we have in this county, it is accurate, it is fast, it is consistent. Hand counts are slow and tedious. Hand counting all the ballots on the ballot, or all the contests on the ballot instead of just one or two, exponentially increases the complexity, time requirements, and the likelihood of human error. I don't believe it's possible to complete a 100% hand count during the official canvass timeframe, along with all the other tasks that are statutorily required. There are so many other tasks you have to complete that are predicated on having an accurate count in the first place, that you would be waiting on that hand count to be completed before you could do a lot of other work. Hand counts are how you get election week or election month instead of election day. You know, if folks are unhappy that the activities are dragging on for a week or longer after election day, well, hand counts are how you get that. You can't have it both ways. If you want it to happen quickly, you need machines to help you with that. Hand counts will contain unknown and unknowable human errors without an electronic voting system as a crutch. So, you know, Butler County found this, other jurisdictions have found it. They do a hand count. Well, it doesn't match the voting system. The only reason they knew that there were errors they needed to track down is because they had the voting system. So they went back and they found where the human errors were. Then it matched the voting system. Next. So, attacks on the county's elections and its voting system claimed there were thousands of missing, uncounted, or use the phrase excess votes, and that a hand count was necessary to find them. Well, they were not supported by any evidence. The completed hand count proves that the voting system produces consistently accurate results. And the completed hand count proves that the outcome of the presidential election in Lycoming County was correct. Next. I hope that the recount we've completed, that it creates an opportunity for some of the people in this room and hopefully in the wider community to reconsider any misgivings you may have about the voting system. The county has 4 years of accumulated evidence from pre-election testing and post-election audits, plus 2 statewide recounts, and now the hand count we just completed to prove that the voting system works. So to the extent that the recount has restored trust in the county's elections and in its voting system, I thank you for that support, and I ask you to partner with the county to spread that message and stop any further misinformation. And I would also ask everyone to remember that throughout this process, ever since the allegations started about the voting system, the county provided evidence and information to support its position. The county's position was proved to be correct in the end because the facts and the evidence supported that all along. So going forward, please keep an open mind. Give the county an opportunity to correct the record on all the misinformation that is out there. County election directors are professionals. We are familiar with the election code and best practices because we do this every day. If people approach us in good faith with a desire to better understand election policies and procedures, any of us would be willing to have that conversation. Because the alternative is to continue believing misinformation and attacks from outside, to continue to entertain accusations that have corroded our public discourse about elections. The last slide, please. The claim that the county's vote totals were off by thousands, that was put to bed today. The numbers are right there. But we need to watch for what comes next and avoid falling into the same trap all over again. Because unfortunately, there are people who are committed to attacking the county's elections no matter what. They will respond to the results of this hand count by trying to back away from the original arguments they made about the vote totals being off by thousands. They will try to pretend they never said that. They will try to change the subject. They will expect everyone to keep listening to the accusations and believing them in spite of the fact that the accusations were incorrect. The question is, how long do we as a community, as a country, keep listening to and believing these arguments and letting them tear us apart? The attempts to change the subject have already started. We have quotes on the record in local news coverage stating that military and overseas voters have become the new target to be investigated. There were only about 200 military and overseas voters in 2020. So it's already an example of trying to change the subject because it's trying to silently shift the conversation away from allegations about thousands of votes and down to 200 votes and hoping no one notices. Now, I don't think that accusing military and overseas voters of fraud based on the same unreliable evidence that underpinned the attacks on the voting system is going to be successful or popular for that matter. When we talk about military and overseas voters, we're talking about uniformed military and their families. We're talking about overseas missionaries, civilians who are working and studying abroad. One county a few years ago even had an astronaut aboard the International Space Station. And I would say, as an aside, I would like an astronaut voter in this county. When do we get our astronaut voter? But sadly, these voters are now targets. For what reason is anybody's guess, because we've not heard any coherent argument or evidence to suggest that our military and overseas voters are guilty of fraud. And anyone attacking lawful votes cast by military and overseas voters had better be right, because it would be embarrassing to go out on that limb and be wrong. 6 months ago in this room, I stated that no one was entitled to an election outcome based on voter registration numbers or polling numbers or statistics. That's not how democracy works. The way it actually works is you win some and you lose some, because voters can do whatever they want. They can split their tickets, they can violate expectations, and that's exactly what they did in 2020. They did what they wanted, they made their choices, as they do in every election. And that's not a weakness or a failing of democracy. That's simply the way it works. And there's no denying that now, because those are the numbers. Today's the 818th day since the 2020 presidential election. To get a sense of how much time has passed since the election, during our Civil War, 812 days passed between the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter, April 12, 1861, and the Union Army's decisive victory at Gettysburg on July 3, 1863. Gettysburg ended any remaining hope that the Southern insurrection could succeed. It emboldened Abraham Lincoln to declare in his Gettysburg Address that the nation would have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people would endure. It was a memorable moment in American history to support Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s belief that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Now, I know I've been accused of being part of the steal. I've heard it said I need to be investigated. My job as a career election official is to ensure that democracy survives and to defend our elections when they're attacked. To make sure that what Lincoln said remains true. That's why I'm here. It's the oath I take before every election. I've taken it 19 times. If they're attacking me, it's because they have nothing left to work with. It gives the game away. Attacking this country's elections is on the wrong side of history. The moral arc of history that Dr. King described will bend away from it. Each day that passes brings the next presidential election that much closer, and it puts the last one that much further in the rearview mirror. The country is moving on, and now that this hand count is complete, it is time to move on here in Lycoming County as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this time we'll have public comment. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Okay, I'd like to follow up to something that Commissioner Mirabito said when he was questioned about our canvas. Just to give you additional information about our canvas, we had school teachers and retired state troopers, retired postal workers who knocked on doors and asked people, did you vote in the November 2020 election, and how did you cast your vote? Following that, Forrest Lehman addressed the affidavits, the 49 affidavits that were presented by these volunteers. And Forrest Lehman admitted that there were people who voted from incorrect addresses in Lycoming County in November of 2020. There were people who were on the voter rolls as both Democrats and Republicans simultaneously. He admitted that there were inactive voters who were identified. And his explanation as to all the people that said they didn't vote, but somehow votes were cast in their names, was simply that, well, they just don't remember that they cast a vote. And there was no explanation given for the individual in the nursing home that we located, that when she was admitted, we were told by employees she was unable to speak, she was bedridden, she was a first-time voter in November 2020 election, to the amazement of the nursing home employee that we spoke to. When Look Ahead America released its report about Lycoming County and identified people who had voted or who were registered to vote, from UPS addresses in Lycoming County, I reached out personally to the district attorney, Ryan Gardner, who told me that there were over 11 referrals made to the district attorney's office following the November 2020 election. Hardly a perfect election. I'd also like to defend, and I know that you indicated that no personal attacks were to be made against people in the audience, but yet you allowed personal attacks to be made against Jeff Stroman for comments that he made during an interview. So I would just like to comment upon that, since that was allowed to take place. We know that Forrest Lehman is highly credible. We know that he's extremely organized, very articulate. We've all sat through phenomenal presentations by Forrest Lehman, but we have a different vantage point of Forrest Lehman than you do. It was Forrest Lehman that advised election workers that they did not need to post the election results in November of 2020 at the precincts. It was Forrest Lehman who issued multiple press releases warning people to be wary of individuals knocking on their doors when we started canvassing. It was Forrest Lehman who blocked our attempts to obtain mail-in ballot images, and not only did he block them, we know from right-to-know requests that were filed that he wrote to the voting machine company and asked them if they wanted him to object to the disclosure of the ballot images to us. It was Forrest Lehman that blocked our attempts to obtain the CVR data, the spreadsheets from the voting machines. And we also know that he sent an email to the voting machine company inviting the voting machine company to intervene in the lawsuit, in the appeal against us. It was Forrest Lehman who also is seemingly actively campaigning for this move towards consolidation, consolidating our voting precincts and centralized power. On June 7th, 2017, Forrest Lehman testified before the Senate State Government Committee about election reform. His solution: consolidate voting precincts. In November of 2018, he appeared before the Jersey Shore Council members and urged them to downsize the number of voting districts within the Jersey Shore area. We have no doubt that Forrest Lehman is a dedicated employee, but our concern is with regard to where his allegiance lies. Does he work on behalf of the Lycoming County Commissioners, who are a voice of the people of Lycoming County, or does his allegiance lie with the Department of State?
Karen, can I just point something out? What anybody does in this county ultimately is the responsibility of the commissioners or of the Board of Elections in the case of voter services. So if decisions are made, for example, in the 911 center or wherever, ultimately the commissioners are responsible. In this case, this Board of Elections is responsible for everything that you allege that Mr. Lehman has done. If we believe that Mr. Lehman has done something that violates the law or violates his oath, we are the people responsible, not him. That's what we want, and that's what we want the public to understand. If you don't think we did our job as a Board of Elections or as commissioners, then you don't vote for us. Then you don't vote for us, and you actively tell people not to vote for us. But the point is that when we pin it on an employee who's acting under the responsibility of the elected officials, we create dangerous situations for that employee. All the things that you have done, all the things that you cited that were done by Mr. Lehman, we either knew or the director knew, and we did not find objection to. I'll just give you a quick example. We have over $1 million invested in those machines. We want the machines not to become something that people just arbitrarily say, hey, they're no good anymore, right? So there are things that were done, whether it's intervening in a lawsuit or whatever, they're done with this board being responsible. So that's all I'm trying to explain. And we can disagree on particular things, but I want you to understand that it is ultimately the elected officials that are responsible. And you are entitled to be upset with us.
And
I'm not trying to change your mind.
And I do not disagree with that at all. That was a
Yeah.
point that I made earlier. It all comes back to the Lycoming County Board of Commissioners and the election board. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct.
Commissioners, I want to just clarify, with the recent passing of Jesse Bloom, I want to make a point here. I've been doing this for a long time. You know that. Jesse and I were kind of voluntarily took the task of being the trench fighters of politics in our community. But there was one common agreement that we shared, and that is that our differences, as part of the American experience, our differences in America don't divide us, they unite us as free Americans, friends, and neighbors. So the young man that got up, I give him a lot of credit for having the courage to get up and discuss his concerns, but we are all entitled to our opinions, okay? And at the end of the day, we all share in our local community, Lycoming County, and as Americans. And I will tell anyone that's on the other side of this issue, if it ever got to the point where they were loading Americans on cars to go to concentration camps, we'd be fighting for you, just as we're fighting for this today. And, today, there's a gentleman in the room who, 20 years ago, we were aligned on the issue of schools consolidation and concerned about where that would lead our communities. Our elementary schools were ripped. Our fundamental community building blocks of elementary schools were ripped from our communities. And we fought very hard in Woodward Township to try to stop that. We lost a vital part of our community. Today, we're on different sides of this situation, but it's okay because we're still friends. We still share in common other things. But what I will say is that consolidation of voting precincts and centralized counting, I want you to understand, you are going to be faced with this going forward. This is the next part of the agenda. And our feeling is it dehumanizes our ballot. It dehumanizes our communities. When we go a day of voting in our community, it's a social event. It's one of the things that binds our community, just as our elementary schools did. So I ask you to consider that going forward. We have stopped the agenda dead in its tracks by asking questions and holding unelected bureaucrats accountable for their words and their actions in our community. Now, I will say this. Look, I have never taken away what Forrest knows and what he's able to do. But when the unelected bureaucrat becomes the mouthpiece and the philosophical enunciator of the agenda, that's backwards. I don't think that's how it works. You are those people. I want to hear those words out of your mouths, okay? I would rather see you make the statements to the New York Times on behalf of our community because we elected you as the mouthpiece of our community, not the bureaucrat. And again, I don't use the word bureaucrat as being derogatory. Just as politics or politician should not be a derogatory term in our culture. It's become that, unfortunately. This has been a controversial matter. We've all taken our hits. But at the end of the day, what did I say to you at the first meeting and what am I saying to you at the last meeting? Our mission here is to allow the voters of Lycoming County to make an informed decision. Okay, lack of transparency leads to distrust. And when I think of the time and money and effort that residents of this county have put into trying to get access to draw our own conclusions, to make our report, it's disgusting. It's disgusting to have to go to court to look at the CVRs, okay? It's just not the way it's supposed to be. We are dehumanizing our sacred ballot. That people have died for the right to fight. And when I think of my friends over in Ukraine right now, well, I don't even know if they're alive at this point. If I would ask them or discuss what we're going through right now, I don't even know where they would stand on this. Are you kidding me? All right, we should vote. We should have confidence in our system. And I'm going to say it on the closing of this. We are in a position, you did your job, thank you. People can make an informed decision based on what we drug out in the hand recount. And that's fair, and that's the way it's supposed to work. Thank you, commissioners. Really, thank you. We've taken a lot of shots.
Any bells? You know, it's interesting is here, I heard some statements made, Bill Fenderson here from Woodward Township. It's funny that no one brought to the table here exactly why Jersey Shore has to consolidate their voting halls. If I may be correct on this, correct now, I'm saying to you is, due to the ADA accessible into all the buildings, they had to consolidate the stuff in order to get it done right. So, it's irrelevant. We did the same thing in our township because we didn't have good accessibility for ADA. So here's the problem with this thing. Again, there's a lot of room for discussion about this, but when you have to make sure you have the safety and accountability for your buildings, and I can say only one thing. Most of these voting places don't have the money to make their buildings ADA acceptable. If they had the money, why didn't they do it? If a church has the money, why don't they do it for their people who come to church? Making handrails, making places where they can go on ramps, they're well maintained. But again, it's money. So, and I know I didn't want to bring this up, but you know, I see different buildings throughout the area, new buildings that are not ADA acceptable. And I'm a member of some of them. I asked why we can't do certain things. Well, townships think not necessary. You should watch what you're doing. So I said, so when a 73-year-old person fell down on an incline ramp with no handrails on, I said, well, what are you going to do about this? Well, it's up to the township, or we have to go back to the drawing board and understand why we have to be proactive. Like I said 3 weeks ago, we wait for something to happen, we run the red flag up, and then we get into a lot of money. But again, I'm not coming back on anything with this. The reason being is voting halls have to be ADA acceptable. If anyone wants to disagree with me on that, talk to me. I see it all the time. I venture all these different places you go to, senior centers, different localities, stores. But listen, that doesn't want to take a lot of time with this in. And Jeff made a conversation about the school in Woodward Township. Yes, I was in that venue. But unfortunately, the problem is money talks and shit walks. The place was bought 2 or 3 different times. One party bought the building, didn't like the terms, because the school district wanted to use it for warehouses. Well, then they sold it again. And then they sold it again. But anyhow, that's how things work. But listen again, I hope this is put to bed. You know, I understand that they're going to come back and everyone's going to say, well, this isn't the end. Well, being an elected officer going on 13 years in the Lycoming County Election Bureau, it bothers me that all the road work is done in the hole at all the halls. That's where everything happens. Can there be mistakes? Who knows? Problem is, you try to do the best you can, but in all essence, we've always heard that people who work the halls do everything to the best of their ability, and they thank us for our service. But when you look at this, from my standpoint, it's putting a bad black eye on the people who work the elections. I'm not,
Thank you.
again, I'm just addressing this for a personal reason. But again, Jeff, you are correct about that up there, about the school district, about that school. We fought tooth and nail to try to hold that. We couldn't do it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Bill. Go, Bob. Bob.
Bob Pryor, Mifflin Township. I'd like to thank the commissioners again for standing up for right. You are patriots, and I just want you to know that. But on all these reports I've been seeing, I would have been disappointed, especially from one aspect of the reports. Everything is being referred to, our inquiries throughout this whole process has been referred to as attacks. We're not attacking anybody. We have a right to do what we're doing, and they should not be referred to as attacks. And even through this report, all you saw was attacks. It doesn't say in the Constitution we have the right to attack. It says we have the right to question. And that's what we did. And I don't appreciate the attitude of someone referring to everything as attacks. Thank you. Thanks for the good job you did.
Anyone else? Yes.
Al Seaver, Wellstock Township. This issue of attacks, there is a public perception out there that is an attack. It's being attacked, the whole system. I think this whole thing is not going away, and I wonder, it's all coming about because people sign petitions. Were they audited? Are these people actually citizens of Lycoming County? Because I know two people personally who told me they were asked to sign a petition in Wegmans. They were not asked if they even live here. They were just asked, will you sign this? Did anybody audit that? Who are these people? Is it public information? Can I get it and publish it in the paper? I mean, what I hear on the street, people still think the whole thing is crooked. They really do. Well, a certain percentage. Maybe I go to the wrong places. That could be it. I hang around with the wrong crowd. But that is their perception.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Carol Johnson, Fairfield County. I'll be brief.
Fairfield.
I mean,
Township, not county.
Sorry. I appreciate all of this. Everyone being willing to go through and address our concerns. I do have the one concern I do have, and well, I have many concerns, but I won't go there. I have learned personally, because I've educated myself, not knowing any of political anything. So in my profession, if I would have questioned many times what I didn't know, because if you don't ask a question, you don't even know what you don't know. So I learned a lot through this. One of the things that does bother me that I need to find out more about is the connection with the Department of State and local commissioners' government, and who really has the real legal say-so and the good of the county. So I just wanted to say that. I do have a question for Forrest. It's kind of easy. And for you, because you're the election board. Through all of this, do you see a need to clean up voter rolls here, and how does that happen? And when we local people, myself, as I look across the nation to know that we in this little county of ours in Pennsylvania are not the only ones questioning what goes on with elections. It's across the county, and they've proven a lot of things. So it brings up questions in your mind. So one of the things I wanted to know about was the voter rolls, and how do you go about doing
First,
that?
you want to address that?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Maintaining accurate voter rolls is work that counties are doing every day. The challenge with voter rolls is that anytime you run a report, it's a snapshot of what things were like at that point in time, and obviously people's lives are changing every day. People are, they get married, they change their names without telling us, they move without telling us, they die without telling us, and sometimes that gets a laugh, but not today. And we're always having to play catch up on that, because it's not always the first thing on somebody's mind when they're moving or getting married that, oh, I got to change the voter registration. They're doing all kinds of other things, and it might not occur to them. And the election code accounts for that. If somebody moves and they show up at an old polling place, they are allowed, under the state election code, they can vote one last time at that old polling place and then update their address. That's not voter fraud, it just means they didn't get their address updated. So there are programs that the counties are required by federal law to carry out every year, annually, in order to maintain the voter rolls. So for instance, we get data from the post office about change of address. That leads us to do mailings to these folks. We're getting data from other state agencies, even from outside states, that we are able to use to periodically send mailings out to try to get responses back from people and update our records. There are some cases, though, where we don't get a response, and if we don't get a response, the only remedy we have available is to mark that voter record inactive, and that starts a clock on eventually canceling the record. And going back to a lot of the original canvassing and the reports that were submitted, most of those voters had already been identified and marked as inactive. They were already in the process of getting taken off the rolls. These voter maintenance processes, these requirements, they're tricky because you've got people on both sides of the political spectrum who think that they're either too aggressive or too lenient, and the only path that a jurisdiction can maintain is to follow those requirements exactly. Because otherwise you're going to get accused from the right that you should be taking more people off, or you get accused from the left that you're purging people without enough reason to do so. So we have to follow what's in federal law. It's the 1993 National Voter Registration Act. Most people know that as the voter law, but it also has these requirements for how you maintain your voter rolls. We have to follow those processes in order to maintain records and then eventually cancel people. We can't deviate one way or the other.
Did that answer your question, Carol?
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
Thanks, Tom.
I got it.
No.
Go ahead.
All right. Tom Adams, Williamsport. Mentioned about people being distracted, tired, and frustrated. I've been there for a while. But, and I understand, all your arguments first, and but I did have a question on do the machines. Do they give an alert if there's a question on margin? Is there an alert to those ballots?
Not about marks and margins. However, any certified voting system that's in use in the Commonwealth, the scanners that are out at the precincts are required to be able to alert the voter if they overvote a ballot or if they put in a ballot that's completely blank.
Oh.
And so they will do that and give the voter an opportunity to correct it.
Okay. So, and I guess my other question though is on that for a canvas. If on a canvas, when you canvas after are those ballots automatic? Is there any kind of alert that there's marginal or things that aren't there's something wrong with that ballot, so that needs to be looked at?
Right, where we find those after the election. The
Right.
voting system is able to a certain, I guess the way you could put it is it's capable of looking at itself, reflecting on
Right.
itself. And it can tell us if you go into a contest or a candidate, you can say, show me all the votes for this candidate, and it will rank all of those votes in order of its own confidence in its decision-making. So you can actually say, tell me all the ovals for Joe Biden or whoever that you, the voting system, are the least confident in the decision you made, and those should all be empty ovals. But if you see a mark in one of them, then you have an opportunity to award that as a vote. And you can see hundreds or thousands of them at a time.
So I think that's the value of having the paper ballot, so you have that ability to check back, certain things. What I have referred to in the past here, and I actually have in front of me now, was the petition that was signed by myself and two other individuals at a voting ward, because she noticed that something wasn't right going on with machines. There were some issues with the machines before the voting started taking place. One machine was taken out, so the questions were raised. Maybe we should check this precinct after the election. And so the petition was signed, and it was discarded. Ruled against by the department, through the Department of State, through the court system, that that shouldn't be allowed to look at that individual precinct because they're adding another part of the law to this that states that if the election code imposes additional conditions on any recount, a recount or recanvass shall include all election districts in which ballots were cast for the office in question, and petitions accompanied by the appropriate money or bond must be filed in each election district in accordance with this act. So that's 3263 of this election code. 3261 allows for a person that sees something they feel just isn't right. They're not accusing anyone of doing anything wrong. There could be error in the process. It's just errors, and it doesn't have to be verified. It's just the person has a concern, and there's no actual, you don't have to prove evidence. And it's an old law, and the other two people signing on to that have to vote in that ward, but they don't have to witness anything. They're just going by the testimony of the person, and the person has a good character, and that's how the petition was brought forth. And in my estimation, the judge and the state are calling me a liar, saying that I can't discern someone's character, and they're calling a person that initiated the petition a liar, because they denied these petitions. And the reason why that's a subsection to go after one precinct, so you don't have to go through the whole county and through the whole state, is what they brought into this. They added the other subsections of this statute to include, you have a problem with this one precinct, now we have to look at the whole, and you didn't petition to do the whole county, or you didn't petition to do the whole state. That wasn't the question. The question was just what was going on in that one precinct, and it wasn't accusing anybody of anything. That's how you put out a lot of these little fires. And that's what creates a distrust with people coming in and claiming they know everything, and you're going to do it our way, and you have no chance of recourse by a simple petition. Call me a liar. Take great exception to that stuff. And this is how you put these little things out. A little small recanvass of that ward wouldn't have been a problem, and I think going forward, it still wouldn't hurt just to check a different office after each election from each ward. I'm not saying which office, which ward's going to check. That's why you have paper ballots.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
That's my thoughts. Thanks.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I just have Wayne Roush, Williamsburg City. I just have one comment to add, which is I think questions are awesome. Trying to find out things that you don't know and want the answers to is awesome. Canvassing your community, finding those affidavits, that stuff is really impressive. Taking that time and energy and that motivation. Searching for answers is fantastic. It's more difficult when the answers are given and disregarded. So it really feels like there is a search for a particular answer, and until that answer is found, the search will never end. And any information to the contrary is considered suspect on its face, and any information that affirms is considered trustworthy on its face. And that is a difficult place to go because, again, asking questions is great, but where do you go if you don't listen to the answers, or if you don't expound on the answers? If there's anything about the answers to expound on, that's great, but then the kind of infinite nesting doll becomes a bit of a problem. And I guess the only other thing I would like to add is that my understanding, which is not 100% informed, but my understanding is that Forrest Landman does have certain legal responsibilities, and he is in a position of fulfilling those responsibilities, even if it gets him flack from the people who happen to be on the other side of that at any given time. I believe that has happened from both parties. It's my understanding, I don't know that for certain, but it's my understanding that over the history of elections in our county, one party might be more upset with one, the other party might be more upset with one, and a lot of that ends up with Forrest kind of in the middle of that. And to my knowledge, he's done that excellently from any party with any question. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And have a good day.
I think we have one more.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Make sure this lasts 3 minutes, sir.
Good morning. Can I have 4 of these?
We'll have you
Can I have 4 of these? Have a big one. I've watched this process unfold for the last 6 months. Thanks, Commissioner. And I have to say, as I've been listening to all that's been going on, and it's interesting because I stand here before most of you who are supporters and friends of mine on both sides of the fence, on the D side and on the R side. But I go back to the fact that in these United States of America, and make no mistake, I'm not satisfied with how government is at the federal level and what's happening. But you know, we operate under the rule of law, and under the rule of law you have, unfortunately, rules you're required to follow. I found that out myself, having been involved in a number of lawsuits as your sheriff, and in defending what is appropriate and proper and lawful. And I've been educated by an incredible solicitor, and Mike Wiley, and helped me to understand that as your sheriff for now 13 years. And if we don't accept the results that we end up with what I think are good intentioned concerns from anyone that come before the commissioners, if we don't accept results, we have, I guess, a couple choices. We just go away and don't accept results, or we continue to fight, and we continue to fight, and we continue to fight. And the challenge with continuing to fight is, at the county level, we have huge challenges. And I'm not diminishing voting because I'm here because of many of you in this room. But when you get to the point where you say, are we satisfied, as far as the integrity of the county, I think the recount speaks for itself. The numbers were amazing. I was curious to see what the numbers would be because I didn't know. My office participated in this recount. We had either myself or my chief deputy spent considerable time watching the recount, watching the table where Director Lehman sat, or Director McDermott. I can't profess to tell you I watch everybody and see what they're doing or know what they're doing, but I'm going to tell you, I've been doing this for 40, almost like Jeff's like 40-some years. I'm like in the 40-some year group. I have some ability to figure out if there's something going awry in government. I've been responsible for, I won't say county, not the county level, but the removal of 5 public officials in my career. very serious circumstances where I saw something that didn't look right. You can ask anyone who knows me, and those of you who know me, if I think it's wrong, I address it. And many times I address it aggressively. The Forrest Lehman situation, I knew Forrest a little bit when he was at old Lycoming Township as an official there. But I've known him most in my 8 elections now, my 4 primaries and my 4 generals. And there's something I found with Forrest Lehman. When I would say, why do I have to do this? This is nuts. Why do we have to do this? This is crazy. And it all falls back to him saying to me, this is the law. You can't take a shortcut. You can't do this. You can't do that. Why I say he drove me nuts? I'll say he drove me nuts, but he drove me nuts because he believed that that's what the law provided for him and how I had to do it, and how I had to do it to make sure it was done appropriately so I could be your sheriff lawfully and successfully. So from my sense, you know, I don't profess to be the county cop from the sense of law and order, but I assure you, if there's something that I see that doesn't look appropriate, I address it. You can ask any one of these 3 because I drive 4, 5, 6. I drive people crazy when I see something that's done that I don't think is right. But what concerns me is if we don't at some point come to some kind of consensus and agreement, and maybe there is with this result here, I'm worried about our poll workers. I stand over in Executive Plaza or 3rd Street Plaza when they come in at the end of the election night, as do the Commissioners, Director McDermott, and thank as many as I can thank. And I've known many for a very long time, and they are not getting younger, and they are not getting less, or they are not getting more. And I know some of the challenges with staffing polls results in consolidating polls. And I'm worried because I'm probably the elected official that sees more people in a day, a week, or month because of the number of people that come into my office and the kind of work that I do. And I see many people around this county because I travel the county all the time, and I talk to many friends who are in these 82, 83 polls. And they're very concerned because I will tell you, many of these folks have taken us on the chin. They think this is about them. They think this is about something that wasn't done, or the integrity of the process. And since they're at the beginning of the process, many think that. And that's harmful to them. I think the greater discussion is, what do we do to keep poll workers? And if this kind of situation continues to manifest and doesn't at some point come to a conclusion, we're going to have less poll workers and less poll workers. And then what do we do? I mean, this isn't an 8-hour job. This is get up at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, you're there for 12 hours, and then you come down here, you work your way down here, and it's a 14, 16-hour day for people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And that's a huge concern. So I guess what I would say to all my friends in this room on both sides of the issue, wherever you are, this is the rule of law. You know, I hate to say it, I say hesitantly, but the options are, if we don't resolve this civilly in this forum, that's what our courts are for. That's why we have 3-party system. I get frustrated sometimes when I hear, well, I didn't like the court ruling. It was like the Giuliani situation with federal Judge Brand. I read that opinion. It was a horrible opinion on as far as what Mayor Giuliani provided, which was almost nothing. And Judge Brand is exceptionally conservative, and you know that, Jeff. He's a very conservative judge. If we can't resolve it here, then I guess it's a court issue. But remember, if it's a court issue, many folks get involved. We get dragged in and we go through an incredible process. I don't think that's necessary. So with that,
thanks, sir.
I'm done. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you for coming today.
I know you don't want to hear anymore. I know it's 12 o'clock.
You want to come up?
I just want to say very briefly, my name is Michelle Green.
Please come up to the microphone.
I'm from
please.
Williamsport. Wait a minute, I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm a little elderly, excuse me.
I cannot believe that Sheriff Buss came out and said that today. Sheriff, are you concerned also for the poll watchers?
Yes, ma'am.
You didn't say that.
Well, I don't know.
Because it's not just...
Michelle,
Okay,
address
I'm
us.
not supposed to be personally attacking anybody.
You're not attacking anybody, just only engaging the audience. I want you to gauge us.
You know what, everybody has a tendency, if you would move this podium around a little bit, it might be
Well, it's
easier.
because of the live stream, so.
Yeah, oh, we're being recorded. Okay, thank you, goodbye.
Okay, commissioners.
I have one online.
Online? Yes.
David Wilk, way to give this crock pot a forum, commissioners. That's the only one.
Thank you. Commissioners?
Yeah, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'll keep it short. I had the opportunity to get involved in the process of the recount, which was really interesting. And so one morning, you know, I'm observing over there, and Leslie's over there. I helped her out, and I had my own feelings about hand counting, recounting, but by the ballots by hand, because I didn't see it as being a major deal, but I do now. You know, I do now. And when you're sitting there making the marks in a recount, no matter how you do it, whether we put in groups of 20, so that if we saw a number off, it was only 20 ballots we had to take care of instead of 50, right? Which I thought was a great idea. But machines don't recognize patterns, but people do. So during that process, you'd hear Trump to 4, Trump to 4, Biden, Ahmad. And all of a sudden, you hear Biden, and you start to go down right to Ahmad. Now, could you make a mistake? Yeah, absolutely, because I caught myself a couple times. All right, but I stopped it. Something didn't match in the 20. We went back over them. Okay. You could have a name that sounds familiar, you know, or DeFleur Moore. It's easy to record a wrong box when you're doing it, you know, a hand count. Not to mention, I don't believe that the machines recognize that, where humans do. And it was a process. And there's also, you know, competition between the teams. You didn't hear it, right? But I'm sure some said, I can get mine done quicker, right? So all of that comes into play when humans touch the ballots. I think it proved to me that the equipment, you know, was correct. I didn't see any indication where it wasn't. And I feel a lot more comfortable now. I'll be honest with you. I feel more comfortable now with the counters than I did prior. And I have a lot of respect for Forrest and the way he put the recount together. We can tell how many counties are there in the United States, 2,000 some counties.
I don't know that number. I thought you were looking for 67.
Right. No, because listen, this was a great model. How you went about it is a great model, and we would be willing to sell this PowerPoint to any county in the United States.
Commissioner? So, by the way, I just want to address Mr. Stroman. You may have an interesting point there about the article with the paper, and I think it's something that we as a board have to look into. I think that, in fact, the paper spoke to a number of elected officials, but chose to print what they printed, which is what they're allowed to do. Because I think they certainly spoke to me. I don't know if they spoke to my colleagues. But I understand your point that you want to hear from us as reflected. I think they were asking questions, and it's always a touchy thing whether you tell people not to comment. I mean, if you tell an employee not to comment, are you trying to hide something? I'm not talking about this instance, but you raise an interesting point. You know, I just want people to know, I applaud the people for signing the petitions and for getting out and doing the grassroots work and for challenging the system. I believe in that. I believe and I recognize that it's not easy to get people to do that, but when that many people do it, there must be something. For me, at a certain point, and by the way, run people for office. I really mean that. I tell people, if you're not happy with the job I do, run for office. because no one is entitled to these positions. We're not born, this is not a monarchy where you're born into it. People are entitled to have choices and to exercise their opinions. So I certainly don't have any problem with that. I think, though, for me, at a certain point, we have to move forward. And we had to move forward. We directed Mr. Lehman to investigate all those things. And it's particularly on the recount. The reason we had to move forward is because we have serious issues like the ADA, cleaning up ballot rolls, which is done every year in the normal course of business. But honestly, when Mr. Lehman is spending time putting together PowerPoints, supervising people doing all this, it's only natural that some stuff is not going to get done that got done. I know he will get it done, but let's be real, there's only 24 hours in a day. But so the reason I voted against the recount is a couple. First of all, we have created a precedent in this county. And it's going to be difficult when the Board of Elections in the future is faced with a request to do a recount, not to do it. Especially if someone running on a Democratic ticket comes and says, hey, I lost the state rep election, I lost the county commissioner election, I want a recount. We're going to have a hard time denying it, which means that we could be in for a perpetual cycle of hand counting by hand. I'm not sure that's good for us as a community. Trump won the election by 24,491 votes as a result of the official results in 2020. And as a result of the hand count, he won by 24,499 votes. He got 8 more votes. Question is that correct? We don't know whether, after we saw all the possibilities of hand counting, whether he really did get 8 more votes. Are the machines correct? Is the hand count correct? So at a certain point, that process created a lot of distrust, and at the end of the day, the man won the county by over 24,000 votes. So we would have either had to have massive fraud of people voting for him and not for Biden, right? I would have expected the request for a recount to come from the Democrats saying, there's no way our candidate could have lost by 24,000 votes. So I say to myself as a policymaker, as I look at the big picture of a serious suit under investigation by the federal government for lack of access at our polling places for ADA. 56 polling places in question, 25 of them extremely serious. What does it mean when someone in a wheelchair doesn't have access? They can't vote. We're talking about whether or not our votes were counted. They cannot vote. They cannot get to the polls. They can't exercise a right that all of us take for granted. So part of my perception, part of being a leader, is to parcel out which issues are the issues that we have to deal with critically, immediately, and put our resources at, whether it's financial resources on hiring employees, or whether it's spending staff time on recounting, or whether it's getting a coroner's building. To me, that's what the voters have put me in office to do, is to exercise my best judgment. So I want you all to understand that I don't not have respect for what you did, but for me, as an elected official, I have to allocate the resources, and I chose that I could not allocate it in that time. And I hope we will move on, because we have to now get to those challenges, and we need to do it together, because we're going to need to deal with the problem of the precinct access. We're going to need the help of everyone in the community to try to find polling places, so we don't have to spend millions and millions of dollars building ramps and doing other things. So thank you all, I appreciate it.
So lastly, I was placed in office to make decisions and not kick the can down the road, to hear the facts, to hear what goes on, and then to make decisions whether they're right or wrong. And if they're wrong, then those people that disagree with me, there's elections. The ones that support me, I thank them. But I look at this as an issue of people were exercising democracy. They went out, felt something was not right in Lycoming County. And they brought those concerns to us, and they were investigated. They're up here. They're investigated. no findings, or very little findings, but nothing that was, would be regarded as criminal. Petitions were circulated, and we had thousands of people that had concerns about whether their votes counted. That's a concern. So as the Department of State has contacted us since 2015, not yesterday, but 2015, about the ADA compliance, those people that may be in wheelchairs that can't go to vote don't maybe want to go vote because they don't think their vote counts. So with that kind of mindset out there, and with that many thousands of people, it had to be addressed because it was grown by the day. 3,000 became 5,000. They were told they don't have to have any more signatures. It would continue to grow. I said it before, and I'll say it again today. The reason why I made the motion to do this was to make sure the tabulators matched the ballots. I did that because I wanted to make sure I had the back of every poll worker that went through that exercise every primary and every election. To show them that we have trust in what they already verified. And we took that extra step to show it. I talked to somebody who was under the old system, who used to be a poll worker. He said we used to count the ballots till 5 o'clock in the morning. It was exhausting. It was exhausting. As a poll worker, retired poll worker, he says, I'm glad we have the new system. Almost 60,000 ballots were counted in 2.5 days. Approximately 21 hours. It was actually 26 employees that were there for about 21 hours. There was one county worker that was there 1 hour. There was one county worker that was there for half a day. And there was one county worker there for 1 full day. So basically 26 workers that were reassigned within county government at the approval of their department head perform this duty. So when I'm in Hershey, Pennsylvania with my grandchildren last Sunday, and I get a vote call from a voter at 1:30 afternoon, says, what are you guys doing paying overtime? I read in the paper that's costing $60,000. Those are the rumors that have to stop. The lies. You can have a difference of opinion. It's okay, we're going to have difference of opinions. But when you start attacking people and spreading lies and spreading rumors that aren't fact, that's not right. In reality, Forrest figured up 559 hours. I can tell you the exact figure. If you want to put a figure on what it costs the county employees to be reassigned, even though they were doing something different that day, because they do this on primary day, they do this on election day. We have approximately 20 workers come in and work every primary morning and every election morning. Do the same process. It adds up. You want to put a number on it, because we figured out what the hourly rate was and what they were. It's $11,452.97. It's not $217,000. It's not $150,000. It's not $50,000. It's 10 cents. 10 cents for every resident in this county. 10 cents for every resident in this county to make sure that our tabulators match the ballots. 10 cents for every resident to make sure that we had the poll workers' backs. 10 cents to show that in Lycoming County, it's accurate and we do it right. 10 cents for every resident. So those people that want to send us emails, that want to write editorials saying, what's this costing? I want my taxes reduced. I'm not going to reduce your taxes 10 cents. I'm sorry. I'm not going to try to raise them, but I'm not going to reduce them 10 cents. We've done our due diligence. As far as I'm concerned, Forrest has done his job. He's done an excellent job doing this. Whether you disagree with it or not, those are the facts. Those are the numbers. It's time to move on. It's done. I said I would agree to this. I knew this was going to be the outcome. I prayed it would be the outcome. It's time to start having this unification done and move on to what's the real issues of election integrity. Getting voter ID. Same-day elections. Counting, so we know what our results are when we go to bed. Like they do down in Florida now. They fixed it. They had it wrong 20 years ago. They fixed it. We're in America. I said one time before they could count 5 million American Idol votes in about an hour, but they can't get the election process right in the state. It starts at the state level. I want to thank everybody, especially the county workers that did do the reassignments that day, those 2.5 days, for participating in it. I guess if you want to really get technical, we bought them lunch too, so maybe it's 11 cents. So, with that said, I think the Board of Elections have done what they needed to do to show that in Lycoming County, the voting system works. Thank you. Motion to adjourn.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, hello? Sir?
Don't worry.
What'd you say?
I tried to change.
Okay, let me just ask you.